Senad, on the motion that this House would do away, would. This House would do away with vernacular schools. Let's get IIUM on here.
Here. Senad.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I really admit that I have no idea about this topic, and I wanted initially to deliver a humorous speech, but I'll try to stick and be serious. But Mr. Speaker, what we have in Malaysia right now is that racial unity is a historical loss. According to the Merdeka Center, Malaysian think tank, the polls, it says that people don't really understand about each other. So, for example, how will they understand about me as a Bosnian if they understand about each other, Mr. Speaker? So, what we argue, or what we see the problem here, Mr. Speaker, is that existence of the vernacular schools causes segregation among races, Mr. Speaker. And the problem here is that it happens majorly among the youngsters, Mr. Speaker, and this is one of the problems that we'll try to address today. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we concede that Malays also goes to these schools, but it's very negligible minority, Mr. Speaker, so we think that in the essence, these schools really segregate children. Mr. Speaker, what are the vernacular schools? These are schools, sit down, primary schools, with the medium of instruction that is done in Chinese or Tamil language. These are, Mr. Speaker, race-based schools, and they are opposite of national schools, where the medium is Bahasa Melayu. Mr. Speaker, what do we want to do today? Sit down. We want to abolish these schools. How shall we do it? We shall do it in 5 years term, and we shall do it gradually. But Mr. Speaker, in the same time, we shall introduce Chinese and Indian language classes in the national schools. So we think in this way, sit down. In this way, we shall provide please sit down. We shall provide another option for these children. And we say that these classes of the Chinese or Indian language will be taught during normal school hours. It will not be taught after school hours. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we know that the culture is important, but we see here that already we are offering the option of these language classes to the school children in the first place. But moreover, Mr. Speaker, we think that cultural pursuit, if it's so important, we think that you can do it after our school. And we think what's the stance? Sit down. What's the stance of the opening government today is that unity is best served in the single school system, and we think that unity is something that we need to strive on the national level, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we concede that the unity is the very subjective matter, but we believe that having single school system fosters better racial relationships, and that's why we want to stick with that. What am I going to talk about, Mr. Speaker? We shall talk how this proposal increases unity on the first level, and the second level we shall talk how the education has its role as the social tool, Mr. Speaker. Danial will come here and talk about additional benefits of our proposal. Before I move on, yes, Ips.
What makes you think forcing people with different cultural and historical backgrounds together and making them speak will actually enforce integration?
Mr. Speaker, this leads me to my first argument, where I will talk how this will increase the unity. Because, Mr. Speaker, sit down. Mr. Speaker, we say this will increase unity. How, Mr. Speaker? And we say that we shall do it among the primary school children. We know that these children enter primary schools when they are 7 years old, Mr. Speaker. So what we argue here, and what the psychology already proved, is that these are formative years, Mr. Speaker. These are the years when your personality is formed, when you are learning about the world around you, and when you are learning about the people around you, and when you are learning what's the right and what's wrong, Mr. Speaker. So we think from the government side that is essential for the Malaysia as a country and for the Malaysia in pursuit of the national unity to provide the chance for these children to mix with each other, to get to know each other, and to learn that there is nothing wrong with mixing each other. To learn that all people are normal and there is no actually difference in the skin in the skin of the color in the color of the skin, Mr. Speaker. Please sit down. And we think this. How will it increase the unity, Mr. Speaker? So, like I already explained, if these children in early ages, they learn there is nothing wrong among to mix with each other, and there is nothing wrong, there is nothing to be scared from the other races, Mr. Speaker. When they grow up, they will become responsible adults. We think that the adults that actually, please sit down. We think that we know that adults that actually grow up in the mixed environment, Mr. Speaker, they are less likely to be racially biased towards other people, and they are more likely to be responsible citizens when they grow up, Mr. Speaker. So we think if Malaysia is to pursue national unity, such approach to the school children when they are very young, in their formative years, is very needed. Sit down, Nibs. So, what's the second argument, Mr. Speaker? I will talk about the role of education. From the government side, Mr. Speaker, we question what is education really about? Sit down. Is education only about learning math, languages, reading, and all these things, or is it education about something more, Mr. Speaker? Because we think that for the Malaysian government, the education is the medium for the fostering social structure, Mr. Speaker. We think that the state can through the education state can cultivate tolerance among races, Mr. Speaker. And we think this is important. This is very important because, Mr. Speaker, in the school, you are not just learning about, you're not just studying math or learning or just getting the new knowledge. When you go to the school, Mr. Speaker, you learn about other people around you, and we think, as we already explained, you can learn about your environment, and if that environment is composed of people from different races and different nationalities, Mr. Speaker, you actually are getting new social skills, Mr. Speaker. And we think this is essential if you want to become a successful citizen, Mr. Speaker. Because in the education, we think, and this is the best achieved through the education, Mr. Speaker. And example for this is that we already have the National Services Program, Mr. Speaker, where Malaysian citizens go through the three months program and the goal of the program is actually to mix between the different nationalities. So we have already seen the need for this program, and we think it's necessary to expand it to the national school system. So what did we just talk about, Mr. Speaker? We explained how we can increase the unity through such program and how the education can be used as a medium for the fostering social structure. Because of these two things, we are proud to propose.
Thank you, Minister, for your speech. The ball rolling. Let's hear what everyone has in opposition to that case. Just a reminder, we heard somebody's phone go off, so please.
Long live Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the fatal mistake on the side of opening government was that they had Senad, a Bosnian, come up with the entire case. I mean, his ignorance about the situation in Malaysia is clear. What he said was this: all of the racial tension that we have in Malaysia, all of the disunity, is is going to be solved simply by forcing everyone to be in the same school and to teach everyone every other person's language. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. All of his points are actually irrelevant to what the problem actually is in status quo. Our stance on this side of the house is that we will not ban vernacular schools, and our stance is that it is integral for preserving a multicultural society. Our onus on the opposition is that we have to prove that their proposition does more harm than good. We're going to prove that forced assimilation has never worked, and we're also going to talk about how they're actually ignoring the problem of what exactly causes the racial tension in this country. I mean, it's very clear for everyone to see that there's discrimination at all levels within the country, especially coming from the government. And until you solve that, you're not going to solve any of the problems that are happening in society. Right? Because this is what he said. He said that vernacular schools cause segregation. We don't think that's true. We think that what causes segregation is when you have a hierarchy in society and you say that you're going to afford certain rights to particular ethnic groups. That is the actual problem we have. Forcing people in these schools and say, oh yeah, learn how to say fish in Tamil isn't going to solve anything, Mr. Speaker. Right, this is a problem-solution mismatch. They're not actually tackling the real problem. They're just skipping around it. Right? If you look at in Western liberal democracies, for example, you don't have such problems. You have places like Chinatown in New York and wherever where there are vernacular schools, but Asian Americans are integrated within society because the government treats those people equally. That is what the government should be doing and not telling us about this. But anyway, let's engage in their ridiculous models. Because they said, okay, we're going to teach everyone all of these languages, it's going to happen after school. We want to question the load that you're putting on these students. Because first of all, he said that we're going to do this in primary school. I mean, really, you're going to teach primary kids like 4 languages. Is that even feasible? And anyway, let's take a look at how difficult this is going to be. Because Tamil has a different text from Chinese, which has a different text from Malay. It's going to be very hard for these people to learn this. The attitude that they'll just have as well, it's just something that I'm forced to do. I'm just not going to put in that much effort. It's not even possible, even if you wanted to put in that much effort at all. Yes, go.
Tell us how these children growing up segregated will lead to more united Malaysia.
Well, they're not gonna. It's not gonna lead to a united Malaysia if they grow up segregated. But the question is, what causes them to be segregated? As I said, in America you have integration because there's no discrimination from government. But you have it here, you're not taking care of it. On to my substantive arguments. First of all, I'm going to be talking about how this proposal will increase racial tensions within Malaysia. Second of all, I'm going to be talking about how vernacular schools maintain a multicultural society and why that is important. On to my first point of how it will increase racial tension. As I said, the underlying cause of racial tension in Malaysia is because of the inequality. I mean, even Sips right here got straight A's in all of his subjects. But he wasn't able to get a public scholarship from the government because of the current government policy. That is what breeds resentment in Malaysia. Because people feel resentment against them. Okay, you're going to force these people into one school. Right? You're going to force them to do that. They will still feel resentment against the other group whom they see as receiving better benefits than them. All of their resentment against the government will be directed to those people because they see them as the embodiment of the discrimination that they suffer every day from the government. Also, on a second level, right, people won't integrate because look at the message that the government is sending. When the government puts people's races on their ID cards, it's sending the message that it's okay to label people as a particular ethnic group. That is what leads to racial segregation within Malaysia. You guys are not tackling any of that. When you force people into these schools and say that, oh well, people will learn different languages and they'll integrate as a result of that with kiddish analysis, you're burying your head in the sand because you're not tackling what exactly the problem is. Because the problems will remain. People will still feel resentment and they won't feel any need to take that new language they're learning very seriously. Go.
Look, there are many causes of racial tensions that exist. And we believe that a dual school system is one of those causes. Now, don't be beating around the bush and debate about something else. Clash with us.
On your point, as I gave you you the example of how in America you have vernacular schools. I mentioned how in Chinatowns within America you have vernacular schools, but Asian Americans are integrated within America. If you want another example, I can give you another example. In California, Mexican Americans who speak Spanish are also integrated within society. As we've seen with the lady who recently went into the Supreme Court, I'm sorry I forgot her name, but you see Spanish Americans are integrated within society. They still have their vernacular schools, but because the government doesn't actively discriminate, people feel as if they are one country. You're not going to do that so long as people don't feel as if they're being treated as the same. You just say it's the same country, when we actually don't do it. Let's take a look at how minorities will feel about this proposal. They already feel underrepresented by the government. Let's take a look at what happened last time this was tried in 1987. And you ended up having riots in the streets, Mr. Speaker. Minorities were arrested and they were beaten up. And this entrenched the resentment that we see. On to my second point about how vernacular schools maintain a multicultural society and how that is important. Vernacular schools are important because these people feel that their mother tongues are very important to their identity. When you take that away, they'll feel it as if you're trying to force assimilation and you're trying to make one culture dominant over another to absorb another culture. Because let's face it, you're not going to learn all of these languages to the same degree that you know your own language. And the fact is, because the national language is Malay, and many people who don't have Malay as their native language will feel as if you're imposing your own culture on them. We think that these schools are very important because it teaches people their cultural identity, it teaches them that, and they value that. You did not justify why you have to take that away, because nevertheless it's going to be diluted when you have one group which is much bigger than other groups within society. With that, Mr. Speaker, we're proud to propose.
And that was Groovy, ladies and gentlemen. And to continue the case for side government, here comes Daniel.
Oh my god. Too much
Tak muat. Yeah, here.
Testing? Just a moment. It's a finals. Give me my space. Alright. The stance from side government is very simple. We believe that unity is best served under one school system. One Malaysia, one school. As cliche as it is, it's very important. We concede early on that unity and integration is very subjective. And we also concede to side opposition that there are many reasons as to why racial tensions exist. But what we've identified specifically, ladies and gentlemen, is that the dual school system that exists in status quo is not conducive for unity among children, among races. And Senad has talked about it extensively, which was never tackled by Groobie. In fact, Groobie's entire case, opposition's entire case, was probably fed by Ibs, the unfortunately angry Indian. I'm half Indian, so I can make that joke. Now let me give you a fact. The fact, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Firstly, they haven't clashed with our point, but what is their comeback to, it's better to have vernacular schools? America has it. Chinese children get to go to Chinese schools in Chinatown. Where do you get that from? I don't know. In California, that seems to happen. Firstly, we don't believe that's true, but secondly, you have to tell us how the situation in Malaysia and California is the same. We think it's extremely different, so Groobie's repetition doesn't stand. But secondly, he said, poor children, they're going to have a heavy load if they want to learn culture after schools. Poor things, 21 hours credits is really bad. So what they're saying is this, let's forego national unity so that children can carry lighter bags to school. We think that's petty. But what that rebuttal showed us, ladies and gentlemen, is that they principally agree that single schools can bring unity, however they're just probably against the execution of it, or the factual execution of it. But the rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen, is this. And this is important, they talk about forced assimilation causes racial tension. He said people are angry because of government policy, labeling in the ICs, etc., etc. Firstly, that's not the debate. But secondly, if that's the problem, we will solve it too. Because we believe that addressing these problems that happen, i.e. later on in life, when you become an adult, when you're aware that certain rights or you're being treated unequally as a citizen, the realization comes, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, after the school stages, i.e. then you say, oh, wait a minute, I'm very different. But on this idea of vernacular schools being important, he says, oh, it's bad to have forced assimilation, we will lose our culture. Firstly, we said we'll teach the languages in schools, we don't think that's a problem. Secondly, we said you can still engage in like the dances after school in co-curriculum, I'll take it in a moment. But let's look at, ladies and gentlemen, if you are resentful because the government treats you differently, what you're asking with vernacular schools is for the government to treat you differently. Because you're saying, I am different, I want to be different. But what we're saying under our model is that you can still be different, but at the same time you can still be the same as us. You can still be Malaysian, you can identify yourself as a Malaysian, and a child within a Malaysian national school. And it's this kind of perception that we want to remove. Because on one hand you're saying, oh, I'm different, on the other hand you're saying, look, I want equal rights. We think equal rights is important, but we believe that the medium of single schools is what will eventually lead to the realization of those equal rights. Hafiedz.
But that wasn't Groobie's point. Groobie told you that the kids are going to attack other kids, take it out on the other kids.
Where did that come from? No, that's where did that come from? Firstly, these people are children. I don't think parents at home will say, oh, when you go to the school later, you have a Malay boy, punch him, sucker punch him. Malays are weak in the heart. Anyway, let's move on to something more tangible. What I'm going to talk about point is this. We want to look at this idea of the harms of the dual system. Now, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying there's no quality, but we feel that there are inherent harms or disadvantages from having a dual system or dual education system. Firstly, from a social perspective, Senad said there's a segregation of races. But what this leads to, ladies and gentlemen, is that there's a lack of interaction. I.e., you only finally get together in a university context unless you become the UiTM. But what happens here is this. There's a preconceived notion that is hard to dispel as to this is how my race is, this is how we act. Now you're going out, you're seeing different cultures. What happens here is that there's a lack of creation of soft skills of how to interact with people from other races. We feel, ladies and gentlemen, that nowadays when you send your child, your Malay child to a Chinese school, people will be like, why are you sending them there? Are you unpatriotic? Are you not Malay? No, it is racist, but unfortunately that's the perception. Now, ladies, so in fact people will start asking you, are you patriotic? Are you not patriotic? Oh, wait a minute, you're going to a Chinese school. Aren't you Malay? Why are you doing that? These questions exist. Now, as cliche as it is, my mom would always say that when she was young, she went to a convent. When she studied in the convent, there was no such thing as different races. She was a Muslim, ladies and gentlemen. People looked at her and didn't say, oh, wait a minute, why are you studying that? Because ultimately, it's about cultivating of good relations between these individuals. Groobie.
Sir, so long as the discrimination exists, these parents are going to, their resentment is going to be manifested in their children. Because the children
even if that happens, we believe that that's why it's important to have a single system to foster the unity, so that children become the agents of change eventually within society. The second level, what is the long-term manifestation harm? Because as we established, when you have the mindset that I come from my own group, people will usually flock towards people they're comfortable with. And let's look at status quo. The Malaysian public sector is filled with Malay public civil servants because that's just generally how it's understood to be, as unfortunate as it is. In the corporate sector, people understand as the Chinese, people from the Chinese race or people from Indian race to go. Yes, it will change. Because what does the government try to do to remedy the situation? Government has campaigns, there's incentives to recruit non-Malays into the civil sector, then you have, and so on and so forth. But what it shows here is this. We're not saying this is directly because of a dual school system, but this is exacerbated within the society because now the mentality of flocking with their own kind exists even greater. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the government then has to step in and then has to push Bumiputra policies to get more Malays within the society. This is where the government has to step in and have affirmative action policies for races from different sectors. Because when you realize that the problem of grouping up, of flocking happens, then the government has to step in and remedy the situation. We believe that the principle here is this. The dual system is cool. We like everyone to have the choice, we like everyone to have the rights. However, the reality or the long-term manifestation that happens, ladies and gentlemen, is that eventually it creates a mindset within these children. The last thing I want to say is this. If you look at society today, captains of industries, you'll see a very multiracial mix. Because people within who are currently at the top, the captains of industries, were all beneficiaries of a single education system, like my mother was back in the day. You had 3 Chinese chief justices the last 20 years, for the past 2 or 3 decades. Now there hasn't been one for in the most recent times. You have people like Tun Hanif Omar on the Genting Highlands board of directors, because the mentality of people back then was that there's no such thing as differences in race, but there's more commonality within these individuals. And we believe this is what the single system is about achieving, and we believe we can achieve it. Thank you very much.
Energy consumption, allow me to introduce them from here. That was the case for the government. Now to continue the case for the opposition, I would like to invite Ibs.
Kêu gắt sữa. Saya tak tahu. Kena lagi. Got energy consumption.
Ada justification lah tu.
Malas tu. Kita tak kena kill. Oh fuck, it's on camera.
The speaker, I'm sorry if this is an angry speech, but let's listen to this. Every time an opening government comes up with a proposal like this, it makes me laugh. You know why? Because they assume the proposals are so easy. Question number 1, if it was so simple to have integration, why haven't we done it today? Why haven't we done it in the past 10 years or 20 years? Because we've tried it before. In 1987, now Prime Minister Najib, then Education Minister, proposed that we shut down all vernacular schools. The next day, 14,000 Chinese and Tamil people took to the streets. In the Amno General Assembly, there was huge riots. And what happened the next day? You had Operasi Lalang. 127 opposition ministers arrested because they were opposing against the closing of vernacular schools. People were pissed off, people rioted. There was violence all across Malaysia. That was one of the darkest moments in our history. Danial will pretend like this isn't a problem. He thought he could pussyfoot around the issue and just give you the proposal and assume, oh, nothing's going to happen. Everyone's going to accept it. It's all going to be good. We say, crap, Daniel. Think about the reality of the situation. I'm thinking, if you take away my right to have my own schools, to send my children to the kind of school I want them to learn their mother tongue, I am going to be very, very pissed off. Because you're taking away my right to send my children where I want to take them. That is unjust for you. That is racism itself. That is discrimination against my people. I will not stand for that. I will preserve my culture in this country, even if you're trying to force assimilation on me, Mr. Speaker. And that's the stance we take today. We say the position is we will not ban vernacular schools. Our stance is that it's integral for preserving a multicultural society. Because let's understand this. It is not mutually exclusive. Multicultures have always existed in different societies. You can have 5 different cultures who speak 5 different languages, but they're integrated. Integration doesn't mean take all the marbles, put them in a jar, shake it and hope they all turn the same color. That doesn't work. That just doesn't work. What you've got to do is ensure some sort of program exists to take away the integral fundamental problems that exist and then make sure integration happens. You can't just go around the issue and pretend affirmative action can stay, discrimination can stay, soft apartheid can stay, but you know what? We're going to pretend, yes I said that, but we're going to pretend like this isn't happening. Yes, Daniel.
The problem here is this. Problems will exist. However, you have to understand that governments have to be pragmatic. Governments have to take a firm stance. And if they don't start with children and always want to pander to the controversy...
Daniel, if you're going to force a proposal and Indians and Chinese people are going to take to the streets and get very, very angry at a government that's forcing them to national schools, you're moving against integration. You're actually working against yourself. So let's look at number 1. Rebuttal number 1 against both of them. Effectivity, because people are going to hate it. How are you going to push through the feasibility of a proposal that's completely unfeasible, that can never run in Malaysia? Number 2, you never told us how you're going to make sure that integration will happen in national schools. I come from a national school where Indians stuck with Indians, Chinese stuck with Chinese, and Malays stuck with Malays. It was always like that. Polarization will exist in schools whether you like it or not. You need to work with integration by removing the problem from the core. You can't run away from the issue, Daniel. What their proposal is basically throw the spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks. If it sticks, we're good. If it, it flies back at us, then I'm sorry, spaghetti on our face, let's remove it. That's basically it, Mr. Speaker. Number 2, is it justified? Because you're taking away an integral right of a large group of people. These people have a right to send their children to schools of their own culture, to preserve the culture of their people, and you're telling them to forget their culture. Let's force you into a little jar. Sit down. Just because you're going to teach them Tamil in school, it's not even going to be good Tamil. It's going to be basic Tamil so they can run away. And the thing is, you know what? Most of us went to different kindergartens. I went to kindergarten where we learned Chinese in schools. I can't speak a single word of it now. Why? Because at the end of the day, if I'm not mixing with other people when I grow up, I'm not going to use the language, I'm going to forget it, and I'm never going to be integrated. You need to tell us how your proposal will be long term, otherwise it will cause more harm than good. Number 3, soft skills. Daniel, you need soft skills. Because even if you teach the kids all these languages, they will still practice these things. As I told you when they grow up, Mr. Speaker, you need to prove to us how even though we've had national schools for the past 100 years, you still haven't had integration, even though you've had kids of different races and ethnicities studying in the same school. Why don't we have integration in those schools? Why don't we have integration outside? So let's move on to what I'm talking about. Number 1, I'm going to tell you why it's a problem-solution mismatch. Number 2, I'm going to tell you how can integration happen with forced assimilation. Maketab.
Sir, I have a question to ask. Are you defending status quo, or are you going to say there's no problem whatsoever?
Listen, my onus here is to tell you that your proposal is going to cause more harm than good. I'm not going to have the people of this country running around the streets causing riots. I'm going to tell you that you need to deal with the real situation. A real government will deal with the situation, not pussyfoot with the issue. If you give me a real proposal that I can accept, then that's something we can talk about. If you're going to give me a proposal that the opposition cannot agree with, this is a parliament, I'm sorry. Let's talk about this. Why is it problem-solution mismatch? Number 1, as I told you, multiculturalism is not mutually exclusive with integration. What they're trying to do is force assimilation. Why won't that work? Because number 1, these kids speak a different language at home. Number 2, these kids grow up with kids that speak a similar language like the one they speak at home. So when the people you stick around with also go to a school where you speak the same language in school as you speak at home, even though you go for a class that teaches you a different language, you learn the basics of it enough to buy stuff in a market, but you never learn enough of it to mix with other people. Number 2, you never learn the importance of mixing with other people, because integrally there will be comments passed by your parents as you're growing up that will have some sort of an anger towards another race. If you know there was a younger brother in a house where an elder brother didn't get a loan or didn't get a scholarship because of policies, then the younger brother will grow up with an understanding that this is wrong, that something is going wrong, that these people are being discriminated against. So what happens in a country like this? People stick to their own people instead of sticking to a larger populace. Now what is the contrast between this country and other countries where different races are assimilated? Because what happens is the idea of who my people is expanded. Now, why does that happen in California but not in Malaysia? Because the understanding must be that we are all equal under one. Unless that basic level playing field is created, then people will always be different people in this country, regardless of whether you force them to speak the same language or not. That's why it's a problem-solution mismatch. Because question number 1, will they stick with their own? And will they stick with their own? Will they stick with the others? They will still stick with their own in those national schools. Number 2, will racial polarization still exist? Yes, it will. So they haven't really solved the issue. But we asked you, Mr. Speaker, how can integration happen without forced assimilation? Integration will only happen if these national schools actively take an effort to re-educate these children, Mr. Speaker. If vernacular schools take an effort to re-educate these children, we don't think vernacular schools need to be removed from this process. You can learn in whatever language you want to, Mr. Speaker, but if you go outside, you treat everyone as an equal. How will that happen if your personality and your basic understanding of the fundamental principles of this nation is enshrined and you understand that there's no unfairness out there? That's what these kids need. Not being forced to learn another language, not being forced to lose their rights, not their families being forced to lose more than they've already lost. You can't take away so much of our rights. You can't do this to people in this nation. You have to understand that you can't just force assimilation on people. You have to encourage integration. Thank you.
If they want to win, moral high ground. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, we believe that our opening government did a really nice job in trying to push the idea of unity and integration. We believe that there's been a crucial element within this debate that's missing. A discussion about not only education and why it's so important for you to inculcate certain values at a young age, exactly why the government proposed this at the primary school level. On the second level, an analysis of why language is such an integral part of today's debate at the end of the day. But before that, I have two rebuttals to make. Firstly, on this idea of forced assimilation, and second of all, Chinese and Indians riot, therefore we should back down every single time. Because essentially, ladies and gentlemen, if we can really look at every single objection they have, it's like we have all these other racist policies. If you don't get rid of those, then this thing will never work. But essentially, ladies and gentlemen, they're agreeing in principle that if those things didn't exist, then you would agree with the idea of abolishing vernacular schools in the first place. That's exactly what they stand for, ladies and gentlemen. And we think the fact that he's not willing to defend status quo or to show that there is no problem with the status quo shows the fact that he knows that status quo is indefensible at the end of the day. Let's move on to this first rebuttal, which is on forced assimilation, ladies and gentlemen. Because he claims essentially that people will feel imposed. And we think Danial put it quite clearly when he said, these are children. They don't feel imposed in such a way, ladies and gentlemen. Oh yeah, even Daniel dealt with that. Parents won't tell their kid, they'll go sucker punch that Malay kid, right? So we think, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, that forced assimilation is something that happens in a lot of cultures. In fact, especially America, ladies and gentlemen, because they tried to bring up this ridiculous example of how vernacular schools exist in America. No, they don't, ladies and gentlemen. Bilingual schools exist in America. But they do not dominate that one other language over English. At the end of the day, the dominant language is still English, and everyone else is forced to learn English to be able to integrate and assimilate within American society at the end of the day. It is forced assimilation, and thank you guys for bringing up America. On the second rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen, is that Chinese and Indians riot. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, essentially the government should not bow down every single time the people riot. Because essentially the government is elected by the people, and in fact a fundamental duty of the government is to educate. That in fact that's a major reason why parents don't have much control over their children when they're sent to school. Because the government is given that responsibility at the end of the day. What we believe, ladies and gentlemen, is that even though it may be unpopular in the short term, we're willing to do this for the long term. Because in the end, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about our future leaders, which is a long-term policy at the end of the day. I don't think we should bow down at any moment to some kind of demagoguery.
So 92% of kids already go to national schools, yet you still have no integration. What do you think forcing the other 8% is going to happen?
I don't know where he gets the statistics from. If only 8% went to vernacular schools, then why are we even having this debate in the first place? Let's move on to our extension, ladies. It's irrelevant. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our extension, because we believe on side of closing government that education is especially important because it internalizes a certain worldview that the government wants to promote within its citizens, ladies and gentlemen. Not only is it for skills, soft skills, ladies and gentlemen, but it's primarily towards inculcating some, things like moral values, how you view the world, stuff like that. And we think especially, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about education at primary school, when children are most able to be molded, ladies and gentlemen, this is the critical time for us to step in and give them values that or at least remove barriers towards integration, ladies and gentlemen. We don't believe it's a burden on our side to prove that integration will suddenly happen, ladies and gentlemen. But they have to show us why removing a barrier to desegregation is necessarily good or would lead to integration in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. There's a good reason why syllabi and all sorts of Western liberal democracies are generally united, because you want to give the same kind of skills, perspectives and worldviews towards every single member of that, every single child within that society to reflect the values that the society reflects upon at the end of the day. That's why society votes in that government to be able to create a kind of education syllabus that they want their children to be able to learn at the end of the day. Furthermore, on a deeper analysis, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that government messages are easier to deliver when it's in one central education system, ladies and gentlemen. When you have different schools separated by especially different languages, different mediums of instruction, we think it makes it difficult for the government to deliver a single message. It gives room for misinterpretation, ladies and gentlemen, especially when you're talking about different languages at the end of the day. And we think that's contrary to the idea of integration. On the second level, ladies and gentlemen, on analysis of language, we have to acknowledge, and we can see that it is a very sensitive issue because it's linked to culture, ladies and gentlemen. But ladies and gentlemen, we have to acknowledge, and the side of opposition have to acknowledge, the fact that we're only imposing this on a public level, ladies and gentlemen. We're not destroying it at home. Parents still have the ability to take their children home and speak to them in Tamil and Mandarin and Hokkien or whatever language they speak to their children at the end of the day. We think government and parents work together towards creating a kind of education. And we think parents should let the government fulfill its role instead of stepping in too far at the end of the day. Sit down. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, if you're talking about things such as language, ladies and gentlemen, we think having united language results in a more united, country. Look at Japan, for example. They all speak Japanese. I think it's quite indicative of the fact that they don't have racial tension because of the fact that everyone is forced to speak Japanese. There's a lot of minorities that exist in Japan, ladies and gentlemen, but they're all forced to speak Japanese at the end of the day because it also reflects the worldview of the Japanese at the end. So once you have a united worldview, ladies and gentlemen, you have less differences, big differences separating different cultures at the end of the day. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that especially when you're talking about young children, it's easier for them to learn 4 languages, at that young age. Well, how many other languages? At that particular age, ladies and gentlemen, the older you are, the more difficult it is for you to learn those different languages. We think if you acknowledge that language is such an integral part of the culture and the worldview, ladies and gentlemen, that if you allow children or make it easier for children to learn those 4 languages by having a single syllabus where all 4 languages can be taught at the same time, you make it easier for them to be able to communicate with one another. And that creates less barriers at the end of the day. What have we shown to you from side of closing government? We've given you the missing link in today's debate. Why especially are we talking about vernacular schools, ladies and gentlemen? Because in education, especially at that primary school age, is especially important when you're talking about children who are molded at that age. Second of all, I've shown to you the importance of language and how it inculcates a certain worldview that the entire culture can share. It reduces barriers, ladies and gentlemen. The side of opposition has to come back and show us why removing barriers isn't such a great thing. Thank you.
Alright, that was a great execution of Throng's point. Now moving on to leave it Hafiedz.
That's a nice execution of Throng point. Tak ada kenal langsung kan? Woo!
Go Throng.
Go Throng.
Yeah, Throng.
Throng. Woo!
I think I'm the oldest Malaysian in this room, ladies and gentlemen. Which means I probably ate more Malaysian salt than the others.
That's weird.
Like Mara veterans, ladies and gentlemen, is going to defend the indefensible. We're going to say, ladies and gentlemen, that status quo, maintaining vernacular school, is the best way that we can achieve unity, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we're going to do. We're going to defend it. Bring it on. First, let's look at what Maketab said, because it's really funny. But I think this is really where the debate actually started. He said, first of all, on the riots that may on the complaints that may occur if we actually implement this, he said we should not fear riots, ladies and gentlemen. But it's not the riots. I think Ibs tried to complete his arguments, but I'll complete it for him. It's not the actual riots, people going on the streets that we are fearful of, but the kind of sentiment that it creates, ladies and gentlemen. 14,000 can create sentiment for the rest of the groups that is in society, and that's the part Maketab actually missed. Maybe Throng might do better since he's the backbone of the team. Then he said, if it's a single language, it's easier to deliver the message. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we're having this debate is because Chinese and Indians want to go to vernacular schools because they don't understand Malay, ladies and gentlemen. At the youngest age, they want to go to a school where the medium of instruction is at their mother tongue so that they can value the education and receive it at its fullest, ladies and gentlemen. So this is where the closing government will start. In direct clash with the closing opposition, ladies and gentlemen, we will say that yes, parents have a right to instill cultural education at home, ladies and gentlemen. But as we've seen in the case of Cuba in Canada, ladies and gentlemen, although they are still part of Canada, they're still allowed to run their own education system in French. And this is exactly why. Because they want all their French learning kids to actually understand what is being taught to them, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, we feel, ladies and gentlemen, since Japan have portrayed their single Japanese view, they can do that very easily because they are a homogeneous society. It's quite difficult for us to do the same thing unless we can make it's a bit fairer.
Cakap orang. Cakap orang.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a really simple debate. And if you're Malaysian old enough, you would understand that this is a debate about medium of instruction and the ability for us to convey the messages, the most important education towards our children at the most standard age, ladies and gentlemen. And we feel that the maturity of thought that comes as a result of them understanding and receiving the full value of the education is what is going to lead to the ability for them to accept other races better, ladies and gentlemen. Dumping them in the same school, teaching them in a language which they don't understand and probably do not like if they are forced to learn other languages as well, ladies and gentlemen, is going to make things worse. Because first of all, they're not going to be able to value in its fullest the education, and the majority of thought, ladies and gentlemen, in their most formative years will be less likely to be rich. Daniel.
What's the use of this value of thought if you've never had that opportunity to mingle around with someone of different race? Where's the value of experience of being with someone of a different race? We think that's more important.
Okay, why can they get away with, oh, parents can teach their own culture at home, and we cannot get away with parents take their Chinese parents take their Chinese children to Malay weddings as well. Platform, their playgrounds, ladies and gentlemen, in their home. The ability for them to interact with each other does not only come in school. But if you put them in school, you're enforcing upon them a value which will not necessarily benefit them in the long run. Let's look at the trends in Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen. Malaysia have had vernacular schools, and because a lot of the non-Bumiputras who feel less happy with the current government policy. I'm a constitutional Malay, so I don't have much problems with it because I'm receiving lots of benefit. But I understand my Indian brothers and Chinese friends are also, I say Indian brothers because I also have Indian blood. There is some form of resentment, ladies and gentlemen. But we have seen them coming together, being empowered through DAP and keadilan. A lot of and the mainstream opposition in Malaysia is driven by non-Malays, ladies and gentlemen. If you exclude class from the equation, you will see about 40% of only 40% of the opposition group forms from the Malay group, ladies and gentlemen, while the 60% of the opposition are formed from non-Malay groups, and most of them definitely, if you attend a DAP meeting, you will know, attended vernacular schools in Chinese, ladies and gentlemen. But that doesn't mean they cannot fight for better policies on a broader political scale, ladies and gentlemen. Because they have received good education when they're young, because they have understood it and they receive the full value of that education, ladies and gentlemen, they are able to grow up to become mature in thought, the individuals that are mature in thought, ladies and gentlemen, and then form a political party, fight in the mainstream, ladies and gentlemen. And we are seeing changes, ladies and gentlemen. Najib was so scared. He cannot remove the NEP because the Malay majority will kill him. But he introduced One Malaysia anyway, ladies and gentlemen. What does that say? That says, ladies and gentlemen, that the current government is feeling threatened by the current opposition and the pressures being put by the opposition to create real changes that will lead to real unity, ladies and gentlemen, among the people. Something which have been talked about from the opening bell. So what is this debate about, ladies and gentlemen? This debate is not about young kids beating each other up. This debate is not about the 14,000 people who go on riot. This debate, ladies and gentlemen, is about what is best for the youngest members of our community. Be it Indians, Chinese or Malays, ladies and gentlemen, they deserve a right to receive education in a language, in their mother tongue, ladies and gentlemen, so that they're able to understand it, fully appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen, and because they have considered that the formative years is so important, ladies and gentlemen, maturity of thought can lead to better changes, and unity is best achieved if we keep vernacular schools.
That was a rare glimpse on how training is like over here. Moving on to the whip, let's get Throng on stage.
Throng.
Sharp noises and sudden movements.
Throng. Whoa. Wow. Wow.
Karaoke, Throng.
Throngism.
Dia nak cakap. Trademark.
Crowd pleaser.
Trademark tu. Throng teaser.
Mr. Speaker, I love Malaysia and Malaysia loves me. And this debate concerns primarily about our country, ladies and gentlemen, about a policy that has been continuing since the previous colonization, because essentially vernacular school existed precisely because of the divide and rule policy, because of our previous colonization. Because this continuation existed because our government using it. Because essentially, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do today is that we want to remove the barrier, something which is institutionalized by our own government, which can only be achieved by a government removing this school, ladies and gentlemen, because essentially based on age statistics, he said that only 8% go to vernacular school. Thus, it becomes much more easier for us to close vernacular school. Just because 40,000 people went to protest 11 years ago, that doesn't mean that it represents the whole view within the majority of parents at that point of time. Unless we have a referendum at the point of time, ladies and gentlemen, something which have not been dealt clearly by the opposition side. Because the question of force, because they want to portray the side of government as forcing people, as forcing children to assimilate this government, something which we feel as a necessary evil for a greater good within the national unity, something which we feel need to be achieved at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. So I have two rebuttals. Firstly, on Hafiedz so-called extension, easy to understand because that's how they were brought up earlier with that language. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we have to first understand that just because you are Chinese, that doesn't mean that your parents will speak Chinese. So does Malay, ladies and gentlemen. Some Malay parents speak English, and that's the first language, ladies and gentlemen. And that's exactly why we say you cannot make such generalization when it comes to government wanting to make a national policy when it comes to education, enforcing and emphasizing integration towards people, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, on this whole idea that the current government is afraid of the people, Mr. Speaker. Najib is afraid of people, something which you don't think so, Mr. Speaker. If we think on the first level, it is good for Najib to think about what opposition think, because something which we feel consider that it is bound by the political pressure to consider upon opening up his One Malaysia policy, which we all think good for the majority at large, for be able to integrate, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'll explain to you today in my point, Mr. Speaker, is that the question of, firstly, what is integration and which proposal will serve this need, ladies and gentlemen. We think, Mr. Speaker, firstly, on the idea of what causes them to be segregated in the first place, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Since parents are in the best position to determine what is best for the children, shouldn't government merely facilitate this choice instead of changing it? No.
What do you mean? Sir, the biggest question that we have to understand is the whole definition of what they mean by multicultural society, because the idea of definition of multicultural society coming from the side of opposition is a very peculiar one, something which we pondered ourselves when you have different vernacular schools which caters to different of people, because we have to understand clearly, Mr. Speaker, we on the side of the government forwarded you the idea of environment or where children from different groups or races being able to integrate and communicate, Mr. Speaker. The ability to communicate can only be achieved by this environment that could only be created by a single school. Something which would not happen at all under the status quo when parents like apes would not allow their children to go this
single school because of the existence of vernacular school. We don't think that this kind of stubbornness should exist anymore for the sake of national unity. What do you mean you're right? Sir, the point is that parents are angry because of the fact that you send the kid to single school. We don't think there's so much to speak up because as much as you want to applaud for vernacular school, we are the only country in the world that has vernacular school that caters for 4 different groups or races in this development. Something we feel should not continue further in the long run, on the long-term basis towards integration within the society, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
So you're still running away from the idea that if these people's rights to send their kids to the best form of education that they can while preserving their culture, they may only be 8%, but what gives you the right to oppress these people?
We don't deny people the right to education. We are integrating them to a single-based education where everyone is given the same right and the same level of education standards, which is something that's not existent at all within the school. Something we feel very bad. We don't think, Mr. Speaker, having a vernacular school catered to a specific race in a certain demographic area just because that race lives there the most is something which is necessary for you to create a multicultural society, Mr. Speaker. Something we feel will not happen within the short term under the school, Mr. Speaker. Something will not happen at all if we continue with our opposition case, which is failure, Mr. Speaker. So exactly, I was explaining to you now, Mr. Speaker, why there is a need for removal of this barrier, which is something that is institutionalized, which is vernacular school, that restricts the ability of our young minds and young generations to be able to know and communicate with other young peers, which are important and essential for this generation to move forward in this development. Something we have to consider. Because we have explained to you, Mr. Speaker, how we want to make sure that language creates the worldview of what people views Malaysia and itself. We don't want a country where you call one Malaysia, but you have a multicultural society which speaks different languages and they don't understand what the others are speaking because they are unable to understand what others are speaking precisely because of the existence of multicultural school. They are unable to be nurtured earlier when they are still young. People like Ed, for example, he was unable to understand Chinese very well because he was not a very bright student. Be able to consider in this debate. So I'm explaining to you this moment why it is important for integration, even though it is forced integration this moment, for necessary good, for national unity and integration. For all the reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
Yes, but that was Throng's first final speaker. Somebody is not a stranger to finals. Hopefully this will be his last. I'll go back check.
Shaqib!
Winning home.
Affirmative action. Affirmative action from the National Geography point of view.
Check.
Throng, at least have some respect for Hafiedz. You are who you are today, and the education you received today was primarily because of Hafiedz.
You don't Throng.
But back
That's a lie.
Now, can you hear me like this? Right. Mr. Speaker, what really is important in this debate today? It necessitates a clear policy. That is, either we want a forceful form of assimilation, or we want to respect multiculturalism that exists within society. I will put that in one of my major issues, Mr. Speaker. What are the 3 major issues? I'll get into my issues right away. The first issue is, Mr. Speaker, whether maturity of thought is essential to achieving unity. And this was horrendously neglected by Throng. Such bigotry must not be neglected, and please put that in your paper. Second issue is whether there will be aggravated tension other government's proposals, something which they continue also to push away without even giving some consideration of thought to, or even looking at the realities of Malaysia. And thirdly, the idea of multiculturalism versus forceful assimilation, concluding which is the best premise at the end of the day of achieving unity in a race-based society in Malaysia. Yes, blame the British, Throng, for dividing us, but then now it's the government's responsibility for bringing us together, Throng. But then the reason why we were living in disparity at the first instance was simply because of division of economic opportunities, division of different races according to the needs of the British existence. We argue necessarily, Mr. Speaker, that is something we have to overcome, and in order to overcome this disparity that exists due to the economic opportunities that exist, we say education must be served subjectively in reducing this disparity. And the only way children today and the younger generation can understand that is by maturity of thought. That's why when you value education through maturity of thought, Mr. Speaker, you're inculcated with why we exist differently. You're inculcated with why history serves us like this. You're inculcated with values of division that existed back then, and you don't want this to continue. Hence, we argue necessarily maturity of thought is the key to understanding and hence reducing the disparity. That's why multiculturalism is the best way to go. That's why only race-based politics work in this country. That's why Barisan Nasional is the only party in the world that has 14 different component parties of different races. That's besides the thing. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about when maturity thought is essential in achieving unity. First of all, we argue necessarily, what did Hafiedz talk about maturity of thought? Hafiedz said clearly that when you learn a certain part of your education in vernacular schools, what you necessarily are inculcated with values of morality, values of different ideas, values of religion, and several other school of thoughts. Hence, we argue necessarily this value, Mr. Speaker, also inculcates other sort of unity or other sort of some sort of unity, which will then make them appreciate why they are and who they are today. To be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, the only reason Dato Idris Jalil became who he is today was because Tun Musa Hitam opened a 3-person Kadazan school in Sabah, and he provided access to education, and that access provided him maturity of thought to become who he is today, one of the most prominent figures in Malaysia, and hence bringing together the idea, Mr. Speaker, the ideal of Malaysian identity, Mr. Speaker. We argue necessarily maturity of thought is the way to go. And Throng, you didn't deal with it. I wonder why. Hence, we argue necessarily, Mr. Speaker, you don't just reduce access to education, which is primarily the problem why we have why we introduce vernacular schools at the same time. But at the same time, you have access to value of education. And this value will inculcate you with what unity really is, and will make you embrace and understand and actually learn the nature of unity. Hence, we say that point stands. But before I move on, Mr. Speaker, let's look into the rebuttals of Throng before I go on to my second issue. First of all, what Throng has to talk about, Mr. Speaker, is he says integration can always happen. Integration can always happen through standardization of language. This leads nicely, Mr. Speaker, to my second issue, which whether there will be aggravated tension under government's proposal. The reason, the reason why, Mr. Speaker, aggravated tension will happen under government's proposal is because the language barrier which they are creating under their proposal. We argue necessarily this language barrier, i.e. standardization of only Malay language in any form of subject, will force the students to be complacent in understanding or valuing what their mother tongue is at the end of the day. Because the reason why we have parents who want to send their children to Tamil schools or Chinese schools or Kadazan schools, Mr. Speaker, for that matter, is that so that they can access education and they can learn the same thing in other schools. But we argue necessarily, Mr. Speaker, the aggravated tensions exist when the parents of these children, Mr. Speaker, will bring it to streets when every other language, when their mother tongue language cannot be taught in every other subject, and learning it according to or learning it according to their convenience, learning it according to the values that they want to embrace, and they choose to embrace, Mr. Speaker. As we say, the idea of standardizing the language in schools, Mr. Speaker, and then providing another added option as a form of compulsory, as a form of choice, Mr. Speaker, just somehow create this homogeneous idea, this homogeneous principle that you learn everything in one language, you become complacent about your mother tongue, you don't value what really is Kadazan or Tamil, and you don't really know or don't really know what your cultural background is. Then we say this is counterproductive to the effort of unity, because then you're making them complacent about what they value in their language. We argue necessarily Dan's proposal will only work if he proposes this, that yes, we put all races in one school, but then we mandate each race to learn their native language in those schools. Now that is your unity, because you are inculcating not just their ability to understand and also learn their mother tongue at the same time, but you're also making them learn and mix with other races in the school environment. We say, maybe that can make some sense. But when you provide it as a choice, we don't see how it makes sense in creating this in reducing this barrier when people still exist in a multicultural society. And the easy rebuttal to Throng's idea of integration is simple. When people learn everything in one language, when people become more complacent, they continue and they still continue to mix in their own cluster of races, Mr. Speaker. There is no reason, there's no evolution of integration at the end of the day. We won't see this happening because it still continues to exist after 50 years and after several attempts made by the government. So at the end of the day, whether multiculturalism or whether forceful assimilation will work. We say when you force the ideal or a natural inherent identity to become someone else, someone he's not, what you're doing is you're taking away that person's value, you're taking away that person's appreciation of what really matters. We say only through multiculturalism it will work, and that will happen through access to subjective needs of education through vernacular schools with maturity of thought.
That was the debate. I'm sure all of us have our views.